she was the first woman who was elected as a county attorney in the state of Iowa. And so one of the major accomplishments of her career has been to serve as a lawyer, both in a mid-sized town in the state of Iowa and on the national scene. She's also served as a corporate officer and director of some major international corporations. She's been a public official at county, state, and federal levels. She is a philanthropist, as you will note from many of the comments in the book, particularly related to the institute that she and her husband have formed at Drake University. In addition to those career achievements, she is also a spouse and a mother. So she has had a long and very distinguished and varied career. Now, she's going to be able to add published author to that biography. One of the things that I was talking to Ruth about earlier this evening, she and I became acquainted when we served together on the State Board of Regents, had terms that were contemporaneous, essentially, and worked together despite some differences, at least in our political registration, if not in our political views. But she made an outstanding contribution during her 10 years on the Board of Regents, and it was a great privilege for me to have the opportunity to work with her during that period of time. One thing that I observed from reading the book was that although Ruth and I are generally contemporaries, at least I like to think of it that way, although I'm a few years her senior.
I'm not so sure about
that. But she typically had a much stronger spirit of adventure as she was in high school and college than I think most people of my generation had, including me. And one of the things that she highlights in the book are some stories as to how that started and what motivated her to do some of the many exciting things that she's done in her long career. So with that, the introduction, I don't think anybody came here to hear me, so I'm going to turn this over to Ruth, and
Okay.
the podium is yours.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, I forgot one of the things I was supposed to do. There will be slips of paper passed through the room this evening so that you can ask questions. There is going to be what should be an extensive question period when Ruth has finished her discussions of and readings from the book, and hope you'll all participate in that. But we're going to have these put on paper, and then we'll get to as many of those questions as we can.
Just raise your hand when you have one, and I'll come pick it up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Bob. It was a great, great pleasure for me to be on the Board of Regents with him, and we did a lot of wonderful things when we were on the board, and anyway, my pleasure to have gotten to know him and gotten to know Jane. It's just been a pleasure. Well, I hope that you have as much fun reading my book as I had writing it. And I've written short little vignettes over the years, and my favorite subject to write about is my husband, who happens to be here with us tonight. So Tom's back here. And the interesting thing about Tom is he doesn't really mind so much that I don't always show him in a favorable light, as long as it's accurate. And so far, he thinks it's accurate. So Then I sort of, after writing, and some of these writings are from, 30 years ago or more, and I decided to put them together in book form, and just a little bit to sort of talk about what happened, and really, really for my daughters, my 2 daughters, and my grandchildren, to really let them know that if you're not having fun, do something else, and always think about life as an adventure. So I'm going to read you, begin reading you my first chapter, and it's called The Perfect Job. My college roommate Diane and I had endless discussions about the jobs we would get when we graduated. These conversations were usually held over 3-2 beer in college bars around the University of Minnesota. Although Europe was our target destination, getting out of Minnesota was key. We had never been anywhere else, but surely there were places in the world where men appreciated us and there was no potential for snow in May. One day, Diane excitedly told me about the perfect job for us. The U.S. Army employed civilians to manage service clubs for enlisted men stationed on Army posts. There were several positions available in Germany. One of the perks was an opportunity to catch free hops on military planes around Europe. We could vacation in other countries. It sounded ideal. The qualifications were straightforward: female, single, with a bachelor's degree. I went for my interview downtown at the St. Paul post office wearing my best dress and heels. The interview was conducted by 2 career special service females in their 50s, which seemed quite old to me. As the interview progressed, they asked if I might be interested in working in Southeast Asia. "You mean Vietnam?" I asked. No, dear, we don't send women to Vietnam. We were thinking of Korea." Well, that didn't sound nearly as good as Europe. Besides, Diane and I had a plan. The interview continued as we discussed positions in Germany. The opportunity was a real possibility upon graduation. I could imagine doing this job, and I think they could imagine me doing it. They would get back to me. On the way out the door, on pure impulse, I turned around and said, "Sign me up for Korea." Then I hopped on the bus home and ran into the house looking for a map. Where the hell was Korea? Well, they did send me to Korea. And they sent me to a service club to entertain enlisted men who could not leave their posts. So I was left putting together programs every night for 18, 19, and 20-year-olds without women, booze, or cars. So, that's creative. The camp that I was at was 9 miles from the DMZ, and it was a brigade of men. There were only men there. No women were in the military at that time. And so that was a brigade of 2,500 men. So I lived in a nearby camp of Camp Casey, and every day went over to Camp Hovey where I worked. So it was a high security place, and our family just went over there last month, and it's still as secure as it was then because of all the tensions we've had in North and South Korea. Well, one of the things that happened, I went on an R&R during the year that I was in Korea. And going to Tokyo, which is where I went, was nothing like being in Korea. Korea was a very backward country at the time, and when I went to Tokyo, it was the lap of luxury. And I stayed at the Tokyo Hilton, and it was just a wonderful trip. And one day, reading now from my book, and the chapter is Welcome to Dreamland, one afternoon I wandered through the grounds of a beautiful Shinto shrine right next to my hotel. They were having a little festival with snow cones and cotton candy. The cotton candy was irresistible, and I happily continued my stroll around the grounds eating it. Say, can I have a bite of that cotton candy? I heard a voice ask. I turned around to see a great-looking guy smiling at me. Sure, I said, surprised. Very surprised to hear a Midwestern accent. Where are you from? We discovered that we were fellow Midwesterners from towns of less than 200 people, about 5 hours apart. He was a Navy pilot stationed at Atsugi Naval Air Base near Tokyo, and he was from Iowa, and I was from Minnesota. When he asked, dinner really seemed like a no-brainer. Our conversation at dinner was fun. We bantered about Iowa and Minnesota, the war, politics, you name it. Toward the end of the meal, things took an unexpected turn. You know, I live in a place called Dreamland, he smiled. I laughed. Are you kidding? He said, want to bet? We drove out of Tokyo down winding roads in almost total darkness except for the headlights of his car. What was I thinking? I do make impulsive decisions, but this wasn't reasonable. Dinner, yes, but not headed out into the countryside at night in search of this dreamland with a total stranger. What could possibly come of this? Finally, he pulled up to a 12-story pagoda. He guided me through the lobby, and we took an elevator to the 12th floor. We walked through the suite to the balcony. Here you are. Look down, he said. It was an amusement park, and there it was in huge neon lights, Dreamland. So, over the years, we had a great time, and at one point, we decided to go back to the shrine, and we kept going back, and we got married. And it seemed right to be celebrating our 50th anniversary at the high shrine where we met. Our plan was to gather our daughters, sons-in-law, and 3 grandchildren on site and enjoy a champagne toast. 2 priests at the shrine said that this would not do. This is the shrine symbolizing and celebrating long marriages, 50, 60, even 70 years. And since this is your golden anniversary and you met here, we will perform a full shrine ceremony complete with a formal dance, performed by 2 shrine maidens in official attire. The ceremony will be followed by a Japanese luncheon with sake. Then you can have your champagne. We met at a shrine symbolizing long marriages? Who knew? Maybe the beginning was never quite as fragile as it seemed. I want to read a chapter from this book that is really my favorite, and it's about Tom. And I was asking Bob, what should I read? And he said, you've got to read Dining Out with Harkin. So here it is. Harkin is the most reluctant diner. Even selecting a restaurant can be a frustrating chore. His list of possibilities is endless in any given city. And to winnow out his options, he makes numerous phone calls exploring menus, dress, reservations, facilities for children, and entertainment. He wants dinner to be perfect. Can you give us a table with a view, he asks. Do you make your own pasta? Do you serve Bombay gin? Does the children's menu include appetizers? He impatiently jots down innumerable details. Nothing will deflect him. Meanwhile, his wife slouches listlessly, hoping the selection process will soon be over. Once in the restaurant, Harkin becomes even more apprehensive. The atmosphere isn't as wonderful as it might be, and already he's thinking the service may not be good. Frowning, he anxiously searches the room for the best table. He often selects 2 or 3 and moves his entire party from one table to another, to the frustration of all. By the time the menus arrive, restaurant personnel have identified Harkin as a problem diner. His discussion of the menu with the waiter does nothing to dispel this belief. Long questions regarding food origin and preparation began. Are the pork chops from Iowa? Are the mushrooms domestic or imported? Is the asparagus fresh? I mean, really fresh. You know that for sure? Assuming the waiter has tasted every available entree that evening, Harkin intends to get every last bit of gastronomic information available. Harkin's wife finally has an opportunity to order. Are you sure you want that, he asks. Maybe you should think about it a little more. Rolling his eyes, the waiter completes the orders and escapes, totally undone. That wasn't so bad, Harkin says brightly. His wife reaches for her martini. You know, this book is titled When My Husband Ran for President and Other Short Stories. Now, a friend of mine suggested the title to me, and I thought, I don't know if Tom's really going to go for that kind of a title, because his campaign was, in fact, short. But I talked about other titles, and he said, no, I really like that title, so I think you should do it. So I have a series in here in the book about the campaign for president. This was not a race I was really hot about, to be honest with you. And our children weren't all that wild about it either. But Tom did have one good point, that this was 1991, and this was a great year to run, and there were a lot of important issues that needed to be discussed. And that was really a great argument as to why he should run for president. So at our 16th annual steak fry, I'm reading from the book now, this is none like we have ever had. Over 80 reporters and at least 20 TV cameras engulf our family as we walk across the field towards the crowd. It's a sea of people, not only from all over Iowa, but from Minnesota, Wisconsin, Washington, D.C., and other places. The excitement and magnitude of the presidential race are becoming very real. At 2:00 p.m., the sun starts to break through the clouds. The band plays, the crowd goes crazy, and Tom gears up. He takes the stage. He is ready for the speech, and his 3,000 supporters love it. Jenny has a different view. It's too hot, and he's too boring, she complains. I want to ride horses. All things considered, it was a wonderful, warm campaign send-off. And for those of us closely involved, the day had a historic feel to it. I did notice, however, that within minutes of the close of Tom's speech, Jenny was riding a horse and Amy had managed to find a steak. So much for awe-inspiring events for those two. The campaign has a yo-yo effect. In some states, Tom is king of the mountain, but in others, he is hardly competing. The press is everywhere. And at one point, a reporter shoves a mic between Tom and me and asks, "Does this bother you?" "Of course not," I retort. "It's the most natural thing in the world." Tom thinks this is hilarious. Don't ever lose your sense of humor. But as the campaign progressed, we were running out of money, and we weren't doing well in many states. So we called supporters and family around the country to give them all a heads up. In many ways, our preparations parallel those of Tom's announcement. We are organized and in control. Dropping out of the race with dignity, honesty, and humor is our challenge. Jenny is upbeat. I'm glad you're getting out because I've just about had it with this race. The auditorium at Gallaudet is packed with supporters and press. How they all came on such short notice is a mystery to me. Tom speaks to a standing room only crowd. For the last 6 months, I have had the opportunity to do something very special. I have had the privilege of a lifetime that this son of a coal miner and an immigrant mother could climb the ladder of opportunity and run for the presidency of the United States. It's been about human dignity and justice and about electing a president who cares, not just for the few of us, but for all of us, and for our dreams and our hopes for our children. Our campaign was based on the belief that America is not some at the expense of many, but many to the advantage of all. To invest our national treasure in the skills and talents of the young, to use government to empower and lift up, to give hope to all of us so that we can demand the best from each of us, this is what a visionary government can do. It's a bittersweet event shared with friends. We are saying goodbye to a dream and a campaign. Weighing on Tom is the thought that he has let people down by not being able to continue. We remind him that he has done well and that his message is now part of the political dialogue and that he has a long life ahead of him. We fly home to Des Moines, where Tom gives his speech again. Although this is sad, there's nothing quite as wonderful as being loved in defeat, especially by those who have given you the most. We're proud of you. You did a great job. You didn't embarrass us. We wish it could have been different, but we're happy you ran. This is family. We return back to Washington, where daughter Amy is waiting up for us. We talk about our life without the campaign. Tom will continue as a leader of his party in this election year. But I know this presidential race is over for sure, because the next morning, instead of driving him to the airport, I watched Tom, Jenny, and Susie, our dog, walk to meet the school bus. I had a very interesting career, and it was not really planned out. One thing was planned out. When Tom was running for the Congress in 1972, I was going to become a legal aid attorney at the Polk County Legal Aid Society. And I told Tom I would spend the summer and the fall working for him, and then in November, I would join the Polk County Legal Aid Society. But along the way, we were also studying for the Iowa Bar. We had graduated from law school in Washington, D.C., so regrettably, we hadn't read one Iowa case. And we studied very, very hard. Well, he was out campaigning, and one day, the chairman of the Democratic Party came to visit me. And she said, I'm the county chair, and in Story County, we've never filled the bottom of the ticket. All these spaces have been vacant running for county office. And I'm trying to get all these spaces filled to have a good showing here in Story County this year. And since there are only 2 Democratic attorneys in the county right now, that would be you and your husband, and he is running for Congress, you have to run for county attorney. I said, wait a minute, you know, I haven't even taken the bar, and I have a job that I've already committed to after the election. She said, here it is. That, my dear, is irrelevant. You couldn't possibly win this race. There are no women county attorneys in any of the 99 counties, and in Story County, there are no women attorneys except you. Not to mention that Story County, in over 100 years of existence, has only elected 1 Democrat who was promptly defeated 2 years later. I'm just asking you to help fill the ticket. Well, I didn't need to talk to Tom about this. It pretty well nailed it, and I said, sure, sign me up. Well, against all odds, I won. I was now head of the Democratic Party in Story County. The Attorney General sent us letters titled, Lady and Gentleman. Now, I was the only woman in this room, and there were no women prosecutors at all in the whole state. And I decided that the only way I could probably get other women prosecutors is that I could hire women interns. And a male law student said to me one day, you know, I really want to apply for a job with you as an intern, but I understand you only take women interns. And I said, you're absolutely right. If I don't hire women, who will? And that started it, and today I'm happy to know we have many, many women prosecutors in the state of Iowa, and people running right here and all over the state. And as I moved on to Washington, D.C. to join my husband, I had the opportunity to work in other places, and a very short one was I was Deputy General Counsel at the Department of Agriculture. And during my tenure, I got a call one day from the United States Office of the General Counsel and the Vice President's Office. I see that you have lawyers working part-time in your office. Well, yes, we have some extremely talented women lawyers who are mothers or becoming mothers, and they are a bit daunted by parenting, work, traffic, and childcare, but don't want to leave the workforce. So I agreed they could work part-time. Well, no one else is doing this in any of the other general counsel's offices. Well, it isn't against federal regulations, is it, I asked? Well, no. Well, that's a good thing then, isn't it? I'll keep doing it. So I had many opportunities to be in jobs where there weren't any women, and I had an opportunity to hire women at the Overseas Private Investment Corporation that President Clinton appointed me to. Half of the workforce was were lawyers and half were bankers. And when I left, 50% of the bankers and the lawyers were women. So I've had a great time. And now Tom and I have the institute, the Harkin Institute in Des Moines, and my personal proceeds for this book will go to the institute and the continuing work we do. And I'm happy that both Bob and Jane have been down there numerous times, including the opening of the institute last year. So I'd like to leave this open for questions and answers, and you've been a great audience, and I've loved being with you.
I was going to pass out questions, but you can ask yours while I pass out the paper. Do we have if you can speak really loud and you have a question, why don't you go for it? We're not in child industries. Yeah, ask the question. You can just ask it out. Okay, who started the steak fry?
Who started the steak fry? Well, the steak fry was started by a friend of ours, Gary Kiernan, and thought it was a good way to enjoy a steak someplace out in the country and to grill a steak. And the first steak fry, there were probably like 20 people or less. And when we finally finished the steak fry, the biggest steak fry we ever had, Tom, I think it was about 16,000, wasn't it? Yeah. Somebody, I wrote about the steak fry in the book, and somebody said, "Are you going to keep the steak fry?" And I said, "Are you kidding me?" Yes, sir.
How many steaks did you actually fry?
0. Because it was funny, it was called a steak fry because all of these steaks were grilled. Who knew? Yeah.
There's a really nice comment about you.
Oh, thank you.
I'm going to read it right now. You would have been a wonderful first lady, and Senator Harkin would have been a great president.
Oh, no. Thank you.
You went to law school in the late 60s. What was it like?
Well, there were very few women in law school then. And so it was an oddity to be, I think we just had a handful of women law schools. And Tom and I went to law school together. So that was terrific, and that's a story in and of itself because we only had one set of books. So we studied together, and happily we both graduated, and happily we both passed the Iowa bar together.
All right. You just apparently.
Can you talk a little bit more about the Harkin Institute and a little bit more about the Harkin Institute and the mission of that?
Well, part of the reason for setting up the Institute was to continue some of the work that Tom had done, particularly in the Senate. So first of all, as you know, the Americans with Disability Act was his big signature piece of legislation. And there are numerous workings all the time to upgrade that, to provide jobs, to work on it. And so that's one thing the Institute does. And as a result of that, the Institute has a big meeting every year someplace. And the last one we had was over in Ireland. And we have one this fall in Washington, D.C. And it's also dealing with retirement and financial responsibility, labor, and then with health and wellness issues. And the whole idea is to bring these issues to the forefront of the community and empower people to talk about and to do research in all of these issues, and to have the Harkin Institute be the go-to place. If you have if you have a disability question or you want some knowledge, this is the place you would go to because we're producing papers.
Ruth, could you comment on how you picked up your business skills?
From hanging out with people like you. Well, you know, there are some things you find out when you have as many jobs as I have, that sometimes you're in a job, you're really swimming upstream, and it takes you a long time to get it. But I had some very talented mentors that really helped me in a lot of ways. And one of the things, it was difficult for a lot of people, for instance, being married to people, say, in the 70s, is most members were men, and most spouses did not pursue a career. And I had a mentor over in Boone County. He was a district court judge. And I said, you know what, Judge Howard, it really looks like I'm married to a guy that's going to be in office a long time. What do you think I should be doing? He said, people don't give a damn about the wives. Do what you want to do. And I found that to be extraordinarily liberating.
You mentioned you had some hesitations about Tom running for president in '91. I was just kind of curious. I mean, 8 years earlier, did you have any reservations about when he first decided to run statewide for the U.S. Senate?
No, that was sort of an easy, this was probably, you know, these conversations all occur around the kitchen table, and I would have to say that one was an easy one to go for, and we thought that Tom was really ready for a win in 1984.
I think we can, most of us, imagine the parts of the job that you don't miss. But what do you miss about being there in D.C. in the Senate?
I can't think of anything.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
I always like, I've read the book a few times, but I know
My
that,
publisher,
Right.
so you're my publisher.
well, I was always really captivated by the stories that you told about your grandmother.
Yes.
And I see how it's all woven into is there something that she passed on to you that you've passed on to your children, or something she'd look back and go, wow, Ruth really paid attention?
Yes, well, my grandmother this was my mother's mother, was just a very strategic and ambitious person, and she always had a game plan. And she knew exactly what she was going to do. And even though she might have some opposition and she couldn't always get her husband and other members of the family to do what she wanted, but one wonderful story I remembered about my grandmother, she was very anxious to have my grandfather chop a tree down that was in the lawn of their lakeside home in Minnesota. And she was nagging him, and he was sort of, blowing her off, and, I'm talking to my pals, don't bother me. So she just went ahead and she got a saw and she chopped the tree down right in front of him, and they just ran like hell.
Ruth, you said that the decision for Tom to run for the Senate to begin with was fairly simple to make. The decision not to run again.
The what?
The decision not to run again. Can you talk about how you and Tom arrived at the decision that it was time to move on to do other things?
Well, I think you have to look at the years that you're in office, And I think you have to give people a chance. You just can't be in these offices forever. And that was my opinion. Because it's a pretty rigid lifestyle. And particularly Tom, of course, was enormously successful, and he was really quitting while he was ahead, in my opinion. And what has happened since that time, the parties have gone the other way. Our state has become much more conservative, and so many of the things that Tom did and was successful was when he was in Congress, he could never do today, because you could not pass an ADA, you could not do some of this legislation. And many people stayed too long, I think, and some got defeated. And I've been with Tom, and as we go through Iowa, everybody stops Tom and says, "Thanks for your service." And it's a wonderful, wonderful capstone to a career.
So given that you're a strong, smart...
Yes.
Just as a response on that question, I think back on my 40 years that I was there, and we had a relationship across the aisle that was very good. It was interesting. Most of the things I worked on involved Republicans that I worked with. In fact, the first thing I ever got accomplished in the House of Representatives when I was a freshman was the Human Rights Amendment, which is still part of the law today. And I got it because I got enough Democrats and some progressive Republicans to support it to overcome conservative Democrats and conservative Republicans. But there's that kind of working together. The Americans with Disabilities Act. You have to remember, the first person that introduced the Americans with Disability Act was not me. It was a Republican by the name of Lowell Weicker, senator from Connecticut, great friend of mine. Because you remember, when I went to the Senate in '85, the Senate was run by Republicans. And then in '86, we took it back. The Democrats took it back. Lowell Weicker got defeated in '88. And so then I picked when he got defeated, I picked it up and reintroduced it as my own. We had to make changes in it. But, I mean, we had great people helping us. First of all, we had the President of the United States behind it, H.W. Bush. He never wavered on this, never. We had people like John McCain. We had people like Bob Dole. We had Dave Durenberger from Minnesota was my chief co-sponsor. It's a different time. I mean, you could do those kinds of things. I take some pride again in the largest land conservation program in America today is called the Conservation Stewardship Program. Tom Harkin knows about it. But I could only have done it with the help of Dick Lugar, a senator from Indiana, who unfortunately ran for re-election and was defeated in the primary by a Tea Party person. So, again, I lament what's happened in the Congress and the way that they've just separated themselves out, and there's hardly anything going on across the aisle. I mean, only in the direst circumstances do you get things done. I will point out that one recent success of bipartisanship was, and I don't mean this to be a political gathering or anything, but the recent immigration bill. And the reason I bring that up, because I was in the Senate in 2007 or 8 when we also passed an immigration bill, Republicans and Democrats, and it was supported by then President George W. Bush. When the conference committee went back to the House killed it because they wanted it for a campaign issue. Same thing happened this time. Democrats and Republicans did get together. They did have a good immigration bill, and my reading of it was sort of like what we did in 2007. But then it was, of course, because of, well, as you know, let's say it, Trump weighed in and told people don't support it. So I'm just saying that in response to that it's a different time. I hope that we can come back to that sort of working together, that sort of compromise that you make that moves things forward. But it was just a different time, and when I was there, you could get things done like that. And I think Ruth is right. I don't think I could ever get the ADA passed today in the Congress as it is.
No.
It would just be totally picked apart and not be able to pass. Well, I've said enough.
I always like to, Tom always says, I don't mean to turn this into a political event. Oh, really?
Now we're going to have more questions. Does anyone have one last question?
One last question?
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I guess you had one already, no? Okay, we'll get two then. Two quick ones.
I just wanted to ask how you're feeling, given the thing that happened last night. How are you feeling now about this upcoming election?
Well, I was feeling depressed about our options a couple months ago, and I know everybody was. It didn't look like much of a race, and I thought last night was good, but I have to say, I don't really want to watch another debate.
All right, let's do, Rod, you want the last question? Then there'll be time for signing books, and Prairie Lights is here.
Okay.
I wonder if you can think of a time that you and Tom disagreed on a political issue, and if you could tell us about that.
Well, we normally agree, but I have never really gotten involved so much in Tom's political issues. The part that I loved about Tom's campaign personally was putting together a campaign. Now that really appeals to me, to put together a structure. The issues that he ran on and won on and worked on are all his issues. I agree with him, but they were really not my issues. They were his issues. But I love the fact of putting together a political campaign where you're hiring all those people, you're giving them health care, salaries, and whatever, and you know the whole thing is going to self-destruct on Election Day, one way or another. And so I really enjoyed that part of it. Yeah.
We'll get to that.
First of all, Ruth has a lot more vignettes and short stories that are not. There is one thing we disagreed on. You'll love this story. So I'm elected to Congress. I'm in my first term. I think it was my first term, maybe second. Ruth is county attorney, and Congress voted itself a pay raise. And so I announced that I was not taking the pay raise until after the next election. Which, by the way, historically, that was proposed as part of the original Constitution of the United States, by the way. So I said, I'm not going to take it until after the next election. We're living in Ames. We're kind of scraping by. We live in this small house, and so I arrive home on Friday from Washington to see a banner across the garage in our driveway. A fool and his money are soon parted.
Well, he does have a better memory than I thought.
On that note, I believe we'll bring this to a close. As Steve had mentioned, there are books here from Prairie Lights in the rear, good supply. I would encourage all of you to read this. I've read it several times, and it's a very interesting story, not only about the lives of two people who've been very important to the state of Iowa over the past half century and beyond, but also talking a lot about life in the Midwest during that same period. And I think Ruth has done a spectacular job on that, and I know that you'll all enjoy it. So with that, thanks for coming, everyone, and we're adjourned.
Okay. Thank you.